Into your vocabulary or your ceramic lexicon so that you can better create, your ideas or manifest them, right? Because we have this magic inside our head, and then how do we get the magic out into something tangible? So the more methods we have of expression, the better chance we have of actually communicating our ideas. So what I'm going to show you is, just a bunch of different things that you can pick out and kind of filter and feed into your own ceramics studio. So the first thing I want to talk about is failure. So, as a sort of an experimental artist, both, in paper and plaster and wood and ceramic, I, have a lot of failure because I'm always testing new things. And I'll get really close to something and then I get a setback and then I have to keep going. But it's worth it to me. Trying and staying fresh is really worth it when I get it. So here's an example. I've been developing these cone 8 glazes, so reformulating from 10 down to 8, from 6 up to 8, and firing these pieces on seashells. And I fired these guys a cone too hot, and my shells were a little bit too close to the center of the piece. So I lost, large vases, small vases, medium vases. And what's really crappy is that they're like the prettiest things I've ever done. Like they're really freaking gorgeous. So yeah, there's about 6 glazes on here. And so anywho, but it's just another opportunity to learn from and to grow and to be inspired to do stuff, right? So with the stuff I'm going to show you today, there's also failure involved, and be okay with not always having a perfect piece, or maybe stretching your creativity or your process to the point where it doesn't work, but you know what your limit is, right? You know where you can go and where you can't go. So with that, let's get going. So first, I've got a bunch of stuff. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth today, and I probably am going to lose tools all the time. So you need to help me out. I need you to keep an eye on where this wire tool is. So let's get going. One of the things I make is paper clay, and it offers a really nice dry strength to the clay. So when it's bone dry, you can have a thin slice of porcelain, a thin sheet of porcelain. If it has paper fibers in there, it's really, you can't destruct it. And so it's a really great way to lighten up pieces, maybe by 30 or 40% for wall hanging pieces. It's not good for things like carving. You can't carve into it because all the fibers align. So there's some things you can't do and some things you can do with paper clay. But I really like texture, and maybe doing a lot of extreme firings like pit fires, things like that, where it's a heavy thermal shock, right? And so by taking away paper, if I add this much paper to a bag of clay, then I have, once the clay has been fired to bisque, this will leave, right? It gets burned out. So now the clay is more porous. So it's more receptive to heat and things like that. It's also receptive to thick, heavy pieces. So if I make a 2-inch slab and put burnout, which I'll show you today, or feldspar, whatever, or heavy texture, it's not going to crack because it's such an open clay body. So you kind of have to figure out what you want to do with it. But this is 400 grams of cellulose insulation, and the type is R13, R60. I'll leave this, and I get it at Home Depot, and so of course it's like pre-measured. So you get it in a big block for like $15 that will last your whole life. So I'm just pushing it, slaking it in the water, and so I'm going to start this process now with the slaking, and then near the end of the session we'll mix it up, and we'll go from there.
So 400 grams.
400 grams to a bag, yeah. And so then what I do is I contaminate my porcelain and my going out clothes. And I'm going to cut this into little cubes. So we need to slake this down. If we were to put this whole thing in the water, it's not going to slake very quickly. So I want it to really hydrate all those clay particles. So I just turned it, and this is porcelain. I don't know what they gave me here, but this is porcelain. So I use a lot of different clays, a lot of different porcelains. You know, I look for the color of the porcelain and what it's going to do for my project. I look for the strength. On my side fire pieces, I can't have warpage. Things fired on their side tend to get squishy, and so I'll use different clays for that, which I'll talk about a little bit. Okay, so let's see. I don't want to waste too much time with this, but let me see how fast I can do this. Or yeah, how about a helper? How about 2 helpers? So what we're doing is we're just breaking these into little pieces and just toss them in there. Here's this.
You want to go on to something else?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about clay body right now.
How much water was in there?
About 1/3 of a bucket or so. So what I typically do is I'll fill up the water, and then I'll put the clay chunks in, and then I'll strain off any water that's exceeded the top line of the clay, because that's just excess, and then I'll mix it up that way. So this is also a great way to make colored clay, right? So if you want to add color into a clay body, you don't get a really homogenized blend if you add a stain into the clay and wedge it. So if you slake it down like we're doing now, and then you add your mason stain or your heavy metal, like your cobalt or your copper, whatever, then it really mixes perfectly even. So then I pour this out on plaster slabs, and then I have clay, colored clay or paper clay or whatever I'm going for. So cool. So we're going to do that and this. And then we'll do this guy. So this is terracotta, and it's a really beautiful low fire, little short but nice clay body. And I use this for my micaceous clay. So I'll show you what mica is if you want to take a look. It's really a beautiful mineral. So I'm going to add a couple cups of mica into this one. And so this is super soft, so this will go pretty fast. I don't really need to break it up that much more.
Where do you get mica?
It's a great question. Well, yes and no. You can get mica powder really easily, but I use mica flake, and it's a lot thicker, or it's more coarse than mica powder. And so when I was working and teaching in New Mexico, I was introduced to a Micaceous potter named Felipe Ortega, who recently passed away. And he mined his own micaceous clay in northern New Mexico, and then would build flameware, pots for cooking. And a lot of the high-end restaurants would cook out of his wares in New Mexico.
Does the mica make it more flameware?
Yeah, it's more porous. Again, it opens the clay body up. So my mica is not flameware clay. This is just like for looks. So you wouldn't, put this in the oven. So, but I think I heard through the grapevine that the Clay Planet might be developing a flameware clay. So if that's the case, then this would be a great thing to add into that, and then you could have a really nice micaceous clay.
For surface decoration, at what cone does the mica burn out?
It burns out around 3, so you need to keep it semi-low fire. But it's really beautiful in all your low fire treatments, like your smoke fire. Has anyone done a smoke fire? So smoke fire is basically taking the pot, and if you have micaceous clay, and then burnishing it, right? So you're taking a rubbing stone and you're flattening the clay particles so they become reflective, and then you would fire it, and then as bisque, and then you could put it in a kiln, like a raku kiln, and then take it out around 14, 15, 1600 degrees. It doesn't really matter, and then do like a raku fire except without glaze. So you're basically just smoking it. It turns black, yeah. And so it's a great way to treat a surface with this. So what's going to happen, let me pass around, never mind, it's really red and it'll get everything dirty. I'll leave it up here for later, and you can play with it. But this is Micaceous clay that's already built, and the lighting's really kind of cruddy in here, but there's beautiful little gold shimmers in here everywhere. And so if you can imagine this clay going to like a stark black, then you'll have gold on black. And it's a really beautiful, sensual surface to work with. So
That as a commercial clay?
you can buy Micaceous clay. So Leslie's Ceramics in Berkeley, they sell a white Micaceous clay. And New Mexico clay, you can get them to ship clay, and I don't know what color theirs is. But there's probably 3 or 4 suppliers that will sell you pre-made Micaceous clay. And that might even be flameware, which is pretty cool to think about. So the other beautiful thing about smoke firing is treating the surfaces or the skin of your piece, like with maybe terra sigillata, which is sealed earth, and adding color to that. So this is a red clay body. So after it's bisqued, it's kind of pinky, right? And then if I do a smoke fire, but I put it in a resist bed of sand, then the smoke can't penetrate to that area of the clay body. And so I'll have that pattern that'll be the clay body, which will be the red, and the rest will be smoked. It's a really wonderful African artist named Magdalene Odundu, and she does the just gorgeous coil built forms, and she does a lot of slip work and then resisting with patterns. It's just a wonderful process. I was really into high fire for the first 15 years of ceramics. For me, it was all about high fire glaze. And then the last 10 or whatever years, I've really appreciated the earthiness, the quality of those lower finishes. Okay, so that's here. We have the porcelain slaking. I'm just gonna push this under the line, the water line. We did a pretty good job. I mean, we got lucky, but the water goes right to the top of the clay and not too much more and not under. So that's the perfect amount of water to clay. And then we'll blend that up in a little bit. We're letting it slake. We're letting it kind of break apart. I'm going to do the same thing with this terracotta. We're going to mix it later, and then we'll add the mica in, and then you can see what that looks like. Okay, so let's see. Any questions, please holler.
Because you're adding water, does that mean then you have to take the water out again?
Yeah, it does. So the question was if I'm adding water, does that mean I have to take it out again? And definitely. So, you can use plaster basins to pour it in. I prefer slabs of plaster, so maybe 4 slabs of plaster that I'll just pour out on glass will give me a really nice plaster surface. So then after I've mixed this, I just pour it out on the slab, and then in about a half hour, I take a scraper and I flip it, and then in about another 10 minutes, you can wedge it. So, but it takes a few rounds, right? So it's not like you want to do 500 pounds this method. It would take a long time. But yeah, we got to get that water out of there. Okay, so we're going to go into some burnout materials and feldspar inclusions. I'm also going to use those materials to build with for you a little bit. We're going to do some starting of some baskets that I do. So these are porcelain pieces that have feldspar inclusions. And so feldspar chip you can get here at Clay Planet. That's one of their main ingredients for their Grogzilla clay. Grogzilla is a really beefy, groggy Grogzilla, and it's got feldspar in it, and it's very earthy and very visually heavy, physically heavy. It's just a beautiful, beautiful clay body. It's very rich. And so I just buy their feldspar, and then I put it in different clay bodies, like porcelain. So you can put it in any clay body if it's cone 6 or higher. It's really not going to do anything at low fire. This is a refractory material, meaning it's going to melt at a way higher temperature than what we're firing to. So until you get up to maybe cone 12, you're not going to really notice a difference. These will turn into little white pearls, all of them. There's a little bit of impurity, some iron and things, so that'll come through as well. But you'll see these little tiny white pearl things like this. Now there's glaze over this and they're still coming through. So those little white dots, right, that's the feldspar that's coming through. If I would not have glazed this piece, then it'd be very tactile, right? So it looks beautiful in black clay. like black mountain or dark brown. It looks beautiful in red clay. And you can put it into anything. And again, this is an expression. So if you're making forms and you're like kind of stuck, like how do I go further? How do I express this form or my idea more clearly? Then, you know, having an idea like this, like maybe it's about earth. Maybe it's about being grounded, right? In a cell phone world. Maybe it's about slowing down, things like that. Maybe it's about the tactility, you know, holding something and really feeling that connection to earth. Maybe it's how you want it to feel on your lips, right? So that you know you're in contact with this cup and not a plastic cup. Yeah.
So when you put the feldspar and you just wedge it into the
Yeah, we're going to do that. So, yeah. Yeah, so cool. Let's do this. Let's start with that since we're doing it. So I'm going to use this porcelain. This is a clay that I had Laguna make for me. And unfortunately, you have to have 2,000 pounds made for you. So it's kind of a commitment, but it's really good. So this is 50% B-mix, which is a porcelaneous stoneware. And it's 50% Miller 631 porcelain. So Miller is a great clay body to throw with. And it's pretty white and transparent or translucent. It has a really rich feel. So with my side fire pieces, you know, I have this issue with slumping, right? Like I put them on the shells. So these are all fired on seashells stuffed with wadding. And then these have wood ash and frit on here that kind of drips down and forms these. These are called jewels in the wood fire business. And so they form these beautiful little jewels here from the drips. So with my porcelain, I was getting like, they're kind of, again, like smush face. They look like you know. And so by adding a porcelain to the clay or a stoneware to the porcelain, gives it a lot more body for me. And so again, it was like, you know, trying to resolve that issue. And so I had to make 2,000 pounds, and I kind of might leave my wife over it. It's so good. Just like retire with 2,000 pounds. Just kidding. Okay. All right. So I'm going to wedge some feldspar into here. And so I'm going to do this. We'll do this. And hopefully nothing will fall off. Otherwise I'll move to the ground. In fact, I'll probably just do that. So I'll describe what I'm doing for those of you in the back, but probably the ground is the best wedging surface here. So I'm just going to smash it out. You can use a mallet for this. So something like this, and just kind of hammer it out. It's very hard on your wrist to do this. I've got a couple mallets that I like. This is a solid wood. It's really heavy, and so it, you know, does the job. This looks a little bit cleaner, so I'll use this one. So I'm just going to hammer it out, and I'm making like a bed right now. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to take my feldspar. So I'll show you what we have. Just a little nest, right? A little crib. And then I'm going to sprinkle this in. There's no formula, right? I mean, you can make a formula and you can measure it and do tests if you want, but I just kind of sprinkle some in. So again, it's, you know, porcelain, because porcelain shrinks so much, the typical porcelain will shrink 17, 18, 19%. And so that means that it's going to, the feldspar is going to hang out at the surface, and then the porcelain's going to shrink in, so that it's going to be way more pronounced, the feldspar, with the higher shrinkage clays, where it's going to be more on the skin of the surface if you were using like a, you know, an 8 to 9% clay body, which is most clay bodies, stonewares. So I'm just pressing it in, and we're going to be doing the same thing with the beans with this process. And then I'm going to roll it like a burrito, and then I'll wedge. This is really nice, right? This color. I probably, if I wanted a nice pure porcelain, I probably would have a clean surface. But you know what? This is just another opportunity, right? To see what a little iron does. Maybe it makes it dirty, it has a different expression, see what comes out. Working on the ground is actually pretty comfortable. You know, if you can get past the knees being on the ground, it's a nice posture. Concrete is a great little wedging surface, and it's actually pretty ergonomic. Okay, So I'm going to do a few techniques. I'm going to be on the wheel now. And I'm going to do some really simple pots that kind of take on the expression of the feldspar. They're going to be looser, and it's kind of called like a dry throwing technique. Lots of paddling, a little bit of water, but not much. I have a yoga block. I don't do yoga very much, but it's really great to balance out your body. So either a yoga block or a brick. So if you have 1 foot down on the ground here, your hips are really weird. And so, you know, doing pottery for almost 25 years, like it's going to take a toll on your back. So we have to find every way we can to try to keep ourselves strengthened and be ergonomic. And this was, you know, pretty important for me to balance that out. Okay, so I'm going to put it down on the wheel. I really like the Shimpo Whispers. That's what I use at my studio because it, like right now it would be a banding wheel and I could just freely go, so I'm adjusting. Ugh. But I just got really weak overnight. Let me see if I can spin it real slow. So you can do tight forms or loose forms with this method, just by cutting off the rim in a little bit. So I'm just paddling. Again, if you have kind of weak wrists, you can definitely switch to a paddle and get a little bit more strength that way. So what does feldspar, like, what does this feel like to you? You're all going to have different, you know, ways of experiencing it. What do you see in it? What does inspire you to do? What is it, words or, yeah?
I bought a bowl that someone in the guild made at one of the shows, and it was a regular throne bowl, and on the sides, on the edge, she has the feldspar, and it comes up very organic and it is the coolest bowl, my favorite bowl I have.
So what's your name? I'm sorry. Linda. So Linda was just talking about feldspar not being homogenized into the clay, but maybe being incorporated after the form is built. And so that's definitely something you can do. You can roll pots into feldspar, like a bed of feldspar, and then pat them in, right? And or you can make circles through a cookie cutter and throw them through the cookie cutter, right? And pat them in through the cookie cutter so you have circles, and then pat them in for pattern. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. With that way, that would become like an anomaly, right, of the piece, to have that stick out. And because of that anomaly, you've then created an entry point into the work, right? Because we're telling stories a little bit. We're telling narratives. And so through that entry point, you can get your vision across. You can start to, you know, share what's in your head through that anomaly or that entry point or contrast. You can think about it that way, right? So contrast can come through value, right? Different darks and lights. It can come through texture, no texture, texture. Pretty much every principle of design can be incorporated into a contrast, which would make an entry point. Okay, so I'm paddling. I'm going to switch to my hand. I've got to think about what I'm doing. Hold on. Okay, we're good. I'm talking, I forget what I'm doing. So I'm going to do a platter for you, a feldspar, and go from there. It's a different expression. So paddling is going to create a different, more sort of loosely formed pot, whereas if I throw, I'm then like sort of tied to the wheel, tied to the motion, and so it's just a way to loosen up. You know, a lot of potters still use kick wheels because it's not because it's more laborious, but because it's an expression of the wheel slowing down when they pull, right, and then speeding up, and that's a really beautiful, you know, twist in the clay that gets lost a lot of times with these electric wheels. There's nothing wrong with being loose, you know, it's just being consistent with what you're doing, you know, in that expression. You guys have probably seen paintings where it looks like it's painted in 3 different styles. They kind of like, we switch our minds and we're like, oh, I'll do abstract expression, and I'll go to minimalist, and then I'll go to this. And it's really hard to like focus on that painting. So in the same way, if you're a loose potter, it's totally fine. Any way you make art is okay, you know, I think as long as the piece has consistency, you know, but there's no right or my theory is there's no right or wrong way to make art as long as you don't hurt anyone or equipment, right? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to sponge this. So I'm just compressing now. How many of you are wheel workers in here? And how many of you are hand builders? Yes. So 50-50 and a lot of crossover. Great, this is perfect. I like them both. Like, you know, I started as a potter, and then I got into sculpture, and then I moved to New Mexico and I became a production potter. And then I realized through production pottery that I didn't like production. And so it's all circular, right? Okay, so that's good. You can add some gesture. I love these Michael Sherrill mud tools. So I'm just gonna do some compression. What you're hearing is the feldspar. If you trim a piece, you're gonna see the feldspar really come out of the surface, right? But then when it gets bisqued, it kind of dies again. And then it's not till the high fire that it comes out to life, kind of like color in clay. So this is an edge that I think is really beautiful. So I'm gonna keep it. If you didn't want that edge, you could take a needle tool or a knife and just go down all the way, and now you have a perfect disc to make a platter from, do whatever you want from. So it's a really fast way to make a plate. You can make anybody here can make a 25-pound platter just by paddling, and then cut it off. It'll be a perfect disc. Okay, but we're not gonna do that. So I'm gonna add a little bit more water. And this is called gathering. I'm just basically pushing from the outside without pulling. And I'm just gonna let the clay come up on its own. So I'm being super aggressive. And now I'm gonna just do a little mini pull. And we'll flatten it out. Cool, so that's got a really live edge, right? Let's see if I can push this up, and then I'm gonna show you a different edge on this. We'll do a cut rim. So let's see, wire tool, where's my wire tool? Thank you. You sure? Thank you. This is a beaded wire tool. So there's two things I could say that really shifted my pottery career. One was a beaded wire tool. I took a workshop with Peter Biesecker in Maine, and we took fishing line and we tied one end to a washer and then put it in a little lump of clay on the wheel. And then we took the other end, which is probably 3 times as long as this, and tied it to our finger and let it spin for about 1.5 minutes. After that, we take the middle of it and bring the other end down to that lump of clay and then start to twist with our hand and then let go. And then it'll make a really beautiful cutoff tool. And it's not only pretty alluring, the pattern that you'll get, but it's going to dry your pots a lot more even. So as you cut this off, it's going to allow tiny little air channels to get under your piece. So you can flip it earlier, you can take it off the wheel earlier, and you're going to have better pieces. So I'm going to digress a little bit and talk about the importance of this more, about drying your work evenly. So some of the work I do, you'll see some vases come up that are pretty even in their curve. They're pretty unbroken in their curve. And to create that unbroken quality, we need to dry work very evenly. So if you have a bowl, right, like this, and then you're letting it dry, and the rim, the top third, might be a little bit drier than the bottom, and then you trim it, and you've got this gorgeous curve, and you're very happy with it, and it comes out of the bisque kiln, and it's got a little hiccup in the curve. The part at the very top that's drier has already shrunk 0.5% more, or whatever, and the bottom part, the wet part, has not. And so this is a way to get those flipped earlier, to get them to dry earlier, to get them to homogenize. So I'm always encouraging my students to slow down the process, right? Make 5 pieces at a time instead of making 1 and trying to finish it up and wrap it up, right? So make 5 pieces, cover them in plastic, get them to the exact point where you want to carve, or you want to do, mishima or sgraffito or shellac trap, anything like that. Like, we need to get it to where we want it and not sacrifice. Once you start sacrificing clay body stiffness, you're doing like a disservice to your idea, right? And so we got to be patient and really try to focus on getting clay at the right time. And so more pieces, slow down. It's kind of hard in the summer to do that, right? But spray down, cover up, and this really, really helps for the potters. So if, I don't think I have fishing line. I have a demo somewhere online, so never mind. It's on there. Okay, or come by Deanza and I'll make one with you. All right, so I'm going to use this to cut my rim. So I'm going to hold it very taut, like a faceting tool. I'm going to go up and down and up and down and kind of a little zigzag. Again, with the Shimpo whisper wheels, I like it because I can stop on a dime and then alter and move like a banding wheel. But we'll do the best we can here. So again, we've got a live edge. To me, it's a little forced. It's like fake organic, like I'm trying to be organic, but not organic. And so I'm gonna try to make it a little bit more my style. So I'm just gonna do one little pull just to soften it up and freshen up the line, right? Oftentimes when we make a mark with a needle tool or a pencil or a cutoff tool, whatever, it looks like the tool that you did it with. So that is an expression, that is a narrative of your story, part of it. And so I wanna not have that as part of my narrative. So I'm just pulling through, and I'm going to compress the walls. And now I'll open it up. Can you guys see? Can everyone see?
Noise it makes.
Yeah, totally. It's an experience, right? Cool. So that to me is more activated than the last rim I had. I'm really appreciating that kind of double wall look, that split rim look. I like the quality here. And when I look at this, I think like Celadon, like ice blue Celadon, things like that, or wood fire, something that'll take that on. I'm going to sort of alter the feel of the inside here as well. And let some glaze pull up there. Okay. So we're going to switch over to some hand building. My intention is to start a basket with you and then with the burnout. And then I also want to work with the terracotta clay and the mica. For some reason I thought I would run out of time, but let me move over here. I like to use these Shimpo banding wheels. They're really, spin freely. And so with my baskets, I build them upside down. There's a basket on the screen right now, and they have very narrow bases, and they're pretty large pieces. Again, they're paper clay, so they're kind of feather pieces. And so I have different size bats at my house, and then I wrap them in plastic so that it keeps the rim dry. So I'm going to basically build a conical form, right? And then after it's stiffened up, that will be the bottom of the piece. So then I take it and I flip it over into a chuck or a bucket or something like that, and then I keep building that way. So I'll typically start 3 to 5 baskets at a time and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then flip them over and put a couple coils on and then see if they're activated or not. If they're kind of dormant, then I'll just let them go. And then if they're not, if they're speaking, if they have a voice, and I'm happy with the, the curve, the breadth within the piece, then I'll continue on those. But it's a real fast way to get it going to that point. So I like to have a dialogue with my work, you know, and some things I want to control, like these guys, there's no dialogue, right? I'm just throwing bottles and I want the curve to be even. They're pretty controlled. But things like the baskets and other series, I want there to be, you know, a movement back and forth, like the clay is saying, no, I want you to do this. Like I feel like I have the technical skill to do what I want to do, but when you can listen to the clay and it's saying, I need to go here, then to me, the process is way more engaging. And the outcome is full of energy. Like the final product to me is activated for whatever reason. With these baskets, you know, making 5 of them or 6 of them at a time, I can then do the same thing. It's the same thing with these guys. This is for the next demo. We're doing thrown in altered forms. So these guys, you know, the same deal. I'll throw like blanks, cylinders with different shapes, and they're bottomless. And then I just do a quick little alteration, and then I'll come back and I'll destroy 2 or 3 and keep 4 or 5, the ones that are really speaking and not being committed to like following through with the ones that, whoops, don't need to. Okay, so baskets. So we're gonna wedge in some different beans. This is kind of a medley. So I have kind of a funny story. I was doing this process with bowls. I would put these into bowls and throw them. The first studio I had in Santa Cruz was $100 a month, and it was Upper Branson 40, if you know where Santa Cruz is, and it was way in the boonies. And we had like no doors even, like it was just a shack. And so the first time I started working with these, I came back and I saw these little scratch marks in my bowls. And the mice or the rats, whatever they were eating my beans out. And I was pissed at first, and I threw it away, God damn it. And then I did it again, and I tried to mask it, block it. And then I noticed that my rim of my bowl became very organic. And so it let them eat it, right? And then once they had eaten it to the right, to where I wanted it to be, then I would bisque it, and it'd be done. So then I started making bigger pots, like these are really successful. And I went big, but they couldn't get in the bowls. So I had to build steps for them to get into the bowls to get there. So anyway, here we go. Okay, so it's kind of the same deal with this. Did you guys see the feldspar or not when I wedged that in? Yeah. You could see it? Okay, cool. So we're gonna do this. I'm gonna do some coils, right? So I'm just gonna do a block and then roll some coils and then start on that process. The paper clay is really great for these pieces, for the baskets, because it makes them a lot lighter. But more importantly, I can add a lot more burnout material. If you load up your burnout material, then you're gonna get cracks that will go through the whole piece and it will destroy. You can put a little bit of burnout into something like this, but if you have paper clay, then those fibers stop cracks. So wherever there's a crack, it's local and it doesn't spread. So you can put a ton of burnout material in, get a ton of holes everywhere, and then it doesn't fall apart. It's really groovy. And then again, it's like it's really strong and can be thin. So this is porcelain paper clay. And so the consistency is pretty soft, right? And it's very fibrous. If you want to, it's pretty clean. You can pass this around. So I like to work soft with these because wedging those beans in stiff clay is not fun. So I'll just kind of, work with this right here. So I like to only use as much clay as I'm gonna make because you cannot save this. It's gonna turn really hard really fast. The clay, water in the clay is gonna, or the dryness of the bean is gonna suck out the water and then it dries really fast. So you need to kind of complete pieces, in succession. You could cook with them, the leftovers. What did you say?
And then you can cook the beans.
Exactly.
They absorb the water.
You can cook them. I had a student actually do that where she soaked them and then microwaved them to kill them so they wouldn't sprout, so that she wouldn't get the cracks. And anyway. So normally what happens is I'll make like 4 baskets and then I have about this much clay. right? And so then I say, oh crud, I gotta make another basket because I can't let that go. So, but I need more clay. So I'll make more clay, and then I have 5 more baskets, and then I have a little, and just ongoing, endless.
Have you ever tried it with popcorn?
No. You might get some interesting sounds around 400 degrees. So I'm spiral wedging. You know, it doesn't have to be even. It can be even. You can have it homogenized, not homogenized. You can press these into the surface. You don't have to press them in. Whatever you want to do, right? Okay, yeah, also, I don't use, this is what was offered today. At my studio, I do wooden bats, and then I have these bat grabbers. I think they're called bat grippers now, and I wet them down, and it keeps the bat on really well. So we'll see if, I don't know how well they'll do with that. So yeah, again, the point of the plastic is to keep that rim nice and soft so that when I flip it over, I can attach a coil really easily. Okay. So for me, these baskets, I'm thinking a lot about the negative space that the bean leaves behind. So it's identifiable, I think, and recognizable if you were to look at the shape and the form of being a bean, which ties into the idea of a basket, right, of collection. And so for me, that is speaking about, you know, a loss of collection in society, and that we just buy everything prepackaged. A lot of us don't grow our own food, and it's kind of too bad, you know, and it's like a memory almost. So these baskets, you know, they're not functional. The bases are really narrow, right? So they're tippy, and they're too light, and they're not strong, and everything you don't want a basket to be, right? And so that's what it's speaking about, is our culture in that way. And so this is just a method for, a means for expression, you know, a narrative. Okay, so I do my coils kind of in an altered fashion, call them altered coils. And when I was in graduate school in South Carolina in 2000, there was a builder there who was building forms really fast, and she was doing figurative sculpture, and she would do like 3 sculptures in a day, like big. And so I kind of just took her idea. She doesn't do coils for being pretty, like overlaid coils, but she does it for strength. And so what she does is she just takes something like this, and then she's going to lift one end up, and then she's going to hammer, or we'll just call it me now. I'm going to hammer, and I'm stretching the clay out and moving the clay along, okay? And that's going to open it up. And it's just, you know, just to get a coil. So I'm going to do this. So if I'm doing a series of these, well, one, I only have so much clay, so I'm just going to tie it off wherever it meets. Some of them are going to come up like this, like a, you know, tall cone. Some are going to be like this, squattier. Some are going to be more sharp, angular. Some of them I'm going to add more breadth into, make it more full. So that way when I flip it over, there's, you know, a different expression happening, so I'm not tied into the same thing every time. So I'm just going to angle it out a little bit at the bottom there.
So that's the top.
This will be like the bottom third, depending on the size. So when I flip this over, this will be a cone, and then when it's, you know, after one day or, you know, 6 hours, the beans will absorb the water, and then you can flip them over and keep building this way. And it's a way, again, for me to get a really narrow base almost to a point, right? Where it's very difficult. I'd have to start with a pinch pot and go a little more, and then this is, to me, is way more efficient. So again, I'm gonna do the same technique. So again, everything is a choice, right? So the thickness, the type of clay that I'm using, the thickness of the coil, those are all going to be different expressions. Maybe you have really thin coils at the bottom and it goes to a little bit thicker, and maybe there's a sense of growth that way, right? Whereas if they're all the same, that maybe gets stale, it gets stagnant. All these things are just tools to think about. Is that enough? That's not enough. So another thing I'm thinking about right now, I saw a workshop in Walnut Creek at the Civic Arts Center. Do you guys know about this resource? It's amazing. The Walnut Creek Civic Arts Center, Greg Byard directs it, and he brings in an artist once a year at least, like a high-end artist. So last year he brought in Chris Gustin, and Chris was using just very small pieces of coils and just building that way instead of one loop all around. And so that's something I definitely want to kind of think about. But anyway, the workshops are, you know, like under $100, and you get to see these masters work. It's pretty cool. Okay, so the way I'm going to attach these, there's no water, so the only time I'll use water is I make like a dart cut. I need to score it. But basically I have, let me make it bigger so you can see. So we have the bottom coil and we have the top coil. So this is the outside, right? And so on the outside I'm just going to pull it up. Does anyone know Arthur Gonzalez from the California College of the Arts? He's a figurative sculptor. He does this method. And then on the inside, I'm pushing down with my thumb. And if you get really confident, you can do them at the same time. I'm not there yet. I've only been doing it for 20 years, so I'm not there yet. But yeah. So on the outside, I'm going to pull up. So I'm not addressing the skin of the pot right now. I'm just creating structure. So that'll come a little bit later when I really get into how it looks. Right now I just want to create form. I am going to blend this a little bit. Pull it up. Keep in mind, like, you know, again, the beans are going to dry out the clay really fast. So we need to pay attention to that. And keep things wrapped if you can. You know, the weather in the summer is going to be a little bit more aggressive on the clay. Okay. So again, I'm not going to create breath in the piece yet. It's so wet. I just, like anything I do is just going to get altered. So I'm going to leave this for a minute and then come back to it. Okay. I want to work with the Micaceous clay. So
Rocky, one last question before you leave that piece.
Yeah.
When you do eventually flip it over to work on the top
Yeah.
section, you said you weren't going to be adding water, but that piece dries.
Yeah.
You need to put some water or slip and score to get the next.
The only coil you would need to do that would be the joining coil, because that will dry out a little bit. So you can't pull it up very aggressively. So you have to add a tiny little transition coil and then pull that up. So that's the only time really. And again, like I would do the same thing. I would start on another basket. I would do 5 of them, and then this would be ready to maybe almost turn into a cone after that when that has some strength. Okay, so one of my projects that I'm working on is black clay body that I'm working on, and then doing snowflake glazes, which are these really pretty glazes that look like shale sliding. I'm adding precious metals like neodymium and praseodymium to them so that they shift color in different lights. And so I'm working with this style. And so I'm going to use the terracotta instead. Terracotta is a little bit shorter than the black clay I'm working on. Do you guys know what short means? Short is the opposite of plastic. So when you have a plastic clay, that means it can be manipulated and stretched, right, really easily. Whereas short, it's like it breaks, you know. And again, that's really lovely if you like that edge, right, as texture. But if you don't want that, then you don't. So the terracotta is a little bit on the short side, especially with the mica that we added, or going to add. I gotta speed it up. This is probably a little bit too much clay. Okay, so I have another banding wheel, and I am going to, I have a box of their food, like from Smart and Final. There's these little, I don't know what you do with them, sandwiches or something, like little wax sheets. And then so I'll put it down like that. So this is in between like a slump and a hump. And then I'll just put it down there. And then my rubber mallet, take this guy, and I'm just going to hit it out. So similar to the feldspar piece that we altered the edge. I'm really creating a nice loose free edge with this. I'm also going to make what's called a skirt on the piece. And so I'm going to cut off the edge, the outside, which will turn into my skirt later, because I want that to repeat and up the piece for a transition from the body into the foot. Okay, so that I'm going to save, and we'll do that now. So I'm going to take this off. I can use these maybe for 4 or 5 pots, and then they kind of wear out. So I'm not going to press this down here. I don't want it to stick to the banding wheel, but I'm going to spin it. I'm going all the way down, and then I'll choose the thinnest edge. I'll take this off. So I'm saving this. This is a really important piece right there. And then I'm going to put this back on my mold and center it just enough. And now I'm going to reestablish that live edge. So I'm going to hammer it out from the center. So you can do a lot of different methods this way. Again, this is the micaceous clay, the terracotta. And so if you were going to do a smoke fire, you could just do a pinched little foot right here. It could be gorgeous, right? And do a little burnishing and do a smoke fire. I love molds in that way, and that they don't have to be tight. You can work with them however you want. Okay, so now can you see that edge reestablishing life again? And so I'm not cutting that off. I'm leaving that. I'm going to do a little bit of compression. And I'm going to be careful on the edge to not thin it out too much. I don't want to crack it, but I want it to be a little bit more sexy than it is. Cool. All right, so next I'm going to do a foot ring. So I'm just going to take a little coil. So at my studio, I have a table like this out of wood, and then I just covered the whole thing in canvas and staple gunned it. And it's a really nice surface to work on. Everything's canvas. Okay, so now I'm going to figure out where I want this to be. So the utilitarian nature side of me says make it wider so that it doesn't tip over if it's a bowl. But then the aesthetics say make it more narrow, right? So that you get more lift and more breath under the pot. So kind of already established that balance in my head, and it looks something like that. So I'm going to cut through both of them at a 45, and then just kind of look at it where I want it. And I need to do one thing I forgot to do is I'm going to center my mold so that my foot ring is mostly centered. I'm okay if it's a little bit off, it looks great, but when it's totally off, it looks like a mistake. Okay. And I'll check this again. I'm going to cut a little bit more off here. So if I overlap this just like this, then by the time I pinch it out to compress it and attach it, it's going to be thinner here than the rest of the coil. So what I do is like a 50% overlap like that. And then by the time I compress it, it's the same thickness. If we were to take a cross section, it should look the same here as it does here. So let's do that. The clay is really wet, so there's really no need to score or slip. Just not necessary. So I'm also going to do a little pull on this. Okay, so now I am going to score this though. And let's get this on. Not too bad. So I'm just going to pinch it on. So I'm really pretty aggressive, compressing it into the clay body. And I'm going to attach the inside. This foot is way too beefy for the pot. It doesn't have the same aesthetic. So I'm going to do a little pull. So I'm really going to wet it. Do you guys need a little mist? It's kind of hot in here. And I'm going to pull. So I'm using my fingers, and I'm just going to pull it up. And again, the Shimpo wheels, because they're so heavy, they'll keep spinning like a kick wheel. Great. And then we can cut this off. And I'll address the rim in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this skirt that I saved. So this was the outside of the original little slab that I built. Let me dry this off. It's not going to stick to that. So now I've got a cut edge and I've got a live edge. So I'm going to use the live edge. So I'm putting the cut edge against the rim. Can you guys see that? And the live edge is extending out. When I attach this, I'm going to put pressure against the straight edge. So I would never build like this. I'm going to show you. So I'm just going like that, right? So it's compressing there and not on the live edge because I don't want to kill the live edge. So I'm just going to kind of hold this up. And again, this is, I call it a skirt. And it's just a nice transition between the body of the piece and the foot ring. And it just carries a repetition through the work. Also with these pieces, I don't glaze the skirt. So I glaze here and I show off the black clay because the black clay is really pretty. So there's no glaze here, there's no glaze here, and then the skirt won't have glaze. Because it's raised, right, it also allows me to wax very fast and have a beautiful line rather than just cutting wax through an open plane, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to spray it down. So first I'm just going to do a compression, and then I'm going to go to a rib. And the same thing with the bottom edge here, which would be the top edge, I'm going to do to the skirt. And I don't want to smush it. Otherwise, it'll break and it doesn't look good. So that's it. So we're good there. I can even go back, like it's a little higher here, which is not the end of the world, but I can go back and just compress manually. And now I have a skirt there. I'm going to freshen up this guy a little bit. I'm just going to pinch it just a tiny bit, just so it's not so mechanical. Because right now it's like it looks like a wheel, right? And the rest of the pot doesn't look like it was made on a wheel. And so I'm just kind of pinching, and changing that gesture. And now I've got a gesture that I like. I'm going to compress the inside, the belly. Cool. So typically, if I'm in the groove, I've got about 20 molds that I like. I'll go through make 10 in a sitting, and then the next day I can pop them off with some compressed air. So I'll just hold the air under. I'll hold it like that, and I'll go like pop, like real fast, and then it gets air under there and it releases it from the mold. And then I let them keep drying on there, but that way they won't crack. So sometimes when you work on the mold with the wet clay, they're going to crack. Do you have a question, dear?
Yeah, what happens if you don't have an air thing to get them off? Very good.
I don't know. You could try just monitoring. I don't know. That's a great. You know what? Yeah, the can. Get the can. That probably would work. Can it with the little nozzle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, give it a try.
So you would wrap those in plastic overnight?
No.
And just
No, I don't wrap them.
Au naturel.
Yeah, totally. And then, but you have to pop them off. Otherwise, they'll crack. So as soon as they're stiff enough to hold body, then I pop them off. Okay, so, oh, well, that's kind of janky right there. I forgot about that. So I'd also address that little line. Okay, so that is a mold piece. So again, if I were to smoke this, this would be black with like tons of gold speckles in it. And how are we on time? I think we need to start mixing this. So what time are we going till? 30? 2:30? Great. I think we should mix some of this clay and add some mica, and then we'll see what time we have after that. Okay, so yeah, back away. Let's do the white clay first, since I only have one mixer. And typically what I'll do is I'll, do it we could do it, it's fine, it's been an hour, but I'll mix it once and then I'll let it sit overnight and then I'll mix it again. And there's a lot of there's cellulose in there, right? The insulation that we put in, the fiber. And so it's not going to be as homogenized and as creamy as a slip, but we can get it mostly there. Whereas if you're just slaking down clay, right, then and you do this process, it should be a perfect slip the second time you mix it, and then you can add your color. Getting going is the hardest part. Did you guys see this mixer, by the way? So it looks overkill, but it really works great. And same thing with glazes. Like, I wouldn't use it in a bucket, a small bucket, but this is a 5-gallon bucket to anything bigger. It really mixes so much better and more efficient. Is that a Yellowstone right there? So this is, halfway not even halfway mixed, but it's enough to get more breaking down with the water, more slaking. Could you do terracotta paper clay? Mica terracotta paper clay? Is that possible? Why not? Yeah. So all of this stuff can be combined. Anything. Could you put this into porcelain, the mica? Heck yeah. Just do a low fire, see what it looks like. Do some really beautiful, terra sigillatas with mica, things like that. You need to go to New Mexico Clay and have them ship it. Yeah, and you need mica flake and not mica powder. Powder you don't see, it's too fine, and it's going to open up the clay body, but you're not going to get the speckles. You won't see it.
You're doing great. You got about 20.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm not going to clean this. I'm just going to rock and roll. This one could get messy. I don't think I want that in here though. I am keeping the porcelain away from it because I don't want iron porcelain. I'm trying hard to not get anybody. Okay, so I think I need about 5 more minutes of mixing here. I'm not going to put you through that. But I do want to add the mica. And this is one of my favorite things about this is the process, right? So without loving the process, Why are we doing this, right? For a finished product? No, totally not. So this is really spectacular to me, this mica. 2 cups. Do you want to take a look inside here before I mix it in? It's really lovely.
That's very cool.
So what does the mica do exactly?
It is for decoration for us. So it opens the clay body so that you could make flameware with this, but I'm doing it to create tiny little gold speckles everywhere. Okay. Yeah, so if we take this, if we take this clay outside in the sunlight, you would see lots of gold speckles. So you're welcome to take some of the micaceous clay outside.
So if we look at the New Mexico website, they've got a coarse and a fine. So I'm assuming this.
Get the coarse, yeah. So this needs a few minutes to mix. I'm not going to do that because I want to really quickly talk about terra sigillata. So terra sig is a wonderful base for a lot of work. If you're doing anything low fire, right, it's just a nice skin. So alone, the terra sigillata with my recipe will be like an eggshell white in its surface. It gets fired a little bit, it can get fired to bisque temperature, 1820, but you could also fire it lower, right, to maybe 1700, 1650, and you'll have more of a gloss to it. I'm not going to create a lot of dust, but I do use a 0000 steel wool pad, and I just clean up my pieces with that first, so they're nice and even. You can use a Scotch pad as well, a green Scotch pad, but that even so leaves a little mark. So if I have a lot of cleanup work, like if I want to get rid of throwing lines, throwing rings, then I'll start with sandpaper, like a 220, and then I'll go to a green Scotch pad, and then I'll go to the 0000, and then I have a buttery smooth surface for my pots. So this terra sigillata is only ball clay and a deflocculant, right? So if you think about a flock of birds and you deflocculate those birds, you separate the birds, right? So it's the same thing with the clay particles through different charges. You're separating the clay. And so with these deflocculants, you'll get a separation of clay from very thick clay to very thin clay. So we siphon out the thin clay, then we put it in a crock pot and then thicken it up that way, and then you're left with this really lovely silky surface. So it's just like, feels like silk, liquid silk. And so this goes on bone dry.
Use a crock pot because it's a large enough size? You're not heating it.
I am heating it. Yeah, so if you just siphon off the water, let's say you let it sit and there's an inch of water, the finest clay particles are in that water. So you can let it evaporate for 2 weeks or a month, or you can put it in a crock pot. So put it on low, not on high, or some of them it's medium or high, put it on medium. No lid. We want it to evaporate, and then it will take it down. So we'll make that in the Mendo workshop as well, and we'll add color. So let me just do both. So I did not bring my brush. I have a blush brush that I use, and it's got to be a fairly good blush brush, because if cheap ones, the hairs pull out, and so that really affects the design. You'll see it. So, but a nice blush brush, or if you've retired one, then you could use that. It works really good. You don't want drips with terra sigillata. Drips will show because it's a much thicker application. So we're going to do 3 coats. So depending on the thickness of the terra sig.
You're not worried about any of the clay dust from your sand?
I am. I would not do that like that.
Okay,
I would just take a really, really soft sponge that's not like ringed out and just really quickly go over it. And then it's pretty much back to bone dry immediately. Okay, so that's 1 coat. And here's 2 coats. We don't want to put the terra sigillata on when the previous coat is still glossy, because you'll rip through that coat down to the clay body and you'll never get it the same. So we want to wait till it's dry. It looks transparent, but when it comes out of the kiln, it will be totally opaque with no streaks. That's the 3rd coat. So then after the 4th coat, I'm going to use a microfiber, and these are the best ones that I found. They're from Bed Bath & Beyond. You can get them online, or if you have one, in San Jose. You can get 30 pack for like $5, and they're reusable, but also disposable. When they get gross, you know, you just throw them away. They're also great for putting polishes on your work, floor wax, things like that. And you're not committed to wasting a microfiber. Okay, so this is now the 4th coat.
When you put it on your pieces in your studio, do you do it on a banding wheel, or are you just holding it and putting it?
I'm holding it. So I work in sections. So something like this, I'll do like 3 coats. Whoops, I got to do this. So now that it's lost its gloss, is now the time to burnish. So it's lost its gloss, but it's still wet. And so now I can do that. And that's it. It's perfectly glossy. So the question was, do you use a banding wheel to apply? You can use a air gun if you have an air gun to apply it. So what I'll typically do is I'll do 3 coats over the whole thing, and then I'll do a 4th coat here, and I'll polish. And then I'll do the 4th coat to here, and then I'll polish, and then I'll do here. Because sometimes you can't work all the way through, that'll dry out, and then it starts getting too thick, and you'll get cracking, it'll crack off. So the other thing that's really easy to do is adding mason stain to terra sigillata. So you can pick out pretty much any color. We're going low fire, and just add in between, all depends. The cooler colors need less, the warmer colors need a little bit more. But you can just eyeball it. With my students in my classes, they follow a system where we weigh out like a half a cup of liquid is about 100 grams dry-ish. And then so we can figure 5% would be 5 grams to a half a cup of terra sigillata. Or you can eyeball it. It's totally fine. This is a green, so it's not going to show up. It'll be pretty mellow. I should have chosen like a dark color for you guys. I'll just go all in. This is called Victoria green. It's a really pretty green. So this is great. If anyone's done ferric chloride, you can use this as a base for ferric chloride. You can use it for pit fires, right? So you do a colored terra sigillata and then put it in a pit fire to get the charcoaly and the eggshell pinks and the seaweeds and the masking of the cow patties and all that. But then you have a green as a ground, right? And then the figure would be all of your organics. So then same deal, I'll put this on. The colored terra sigillata doesn't get quite as glossy because the particle size of the mason stain pigment is much bigger than the clay. So, but it'll gloss up for us a little bit. And again, I wasn't thinking of that far in advance to get a contrasting color. You might be able to see it. So that's number 3. And then it's almost dry. There's no glossy. There's a little gloss there, so I'll wait for that to go. So this is number 4. And then we're going to go ahead and polish up. So I'm waiting for that glossy line to go away. Otherwise, I'll rip back to the clay body, right? I'll strip it. So I need to wait till all of the gloss is gone. And then I can polish.
So Rocky, when you apply the terra sigillata, it's same direction. You don't have to crisscross or do anything.
No, it's a no-brainer. I mean, really, it's just so much leeway with this. It's a miracle.
So you do it in sections, there's no lines?
No. The only thing that can happen with sections is you want to work top down because the terra sigillata is going to drip over a glossy surface because terra sigillata is sealed earth, so you're sealing that, so it's really hard to navigate. So that's terra sigillata. Any questions about today? I know there's a ton of information. Did you guys have an okay time?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, cool.
So I watched a video of you doing one of these a couple of years ago where you talked about what you like to use as a sealant after you use fire. Are you still like the Rejuvenate?
Rejuvenate. It's as seen on TV. So yeah. So I did a cold finishes workshop for OVCAG a couple years ago, and they videotaped it. So if you want to see like faux patinas, real metal patinas on clay, rust. I think we did a green or a blue patina. And gold leaf, we talked about 23 karat versus 22 karat versus fake gold leaf. And it's about an hour-long demonstration, and there's a lot of good info there too. But please stay in touch. I'm on Instagram, and that's my main source of getting my work is through Instagram. You can just Rocky Lewycky and then go from there. I've got some cards with some pictures. You can tack one up or not, or throw it away, or use it as a coaster. So it was like $120 for 1,000 and $140 for 5,000. So please take as many as you need here for whatever. You can cut them out as templates, right? And like spray through them. Okay, great. Thank you guys. Cool.